Here's a version of yourself who wakes up already calm, already clear, already hard to rattle. That's not a personality trait. It's 5 sentences said in the first 60 seconds of your day in the right order. By the end of this video, you'll have all 5, and you'll understand exactly why most people who try morning affirmations end up more anxious. Not less a mistake we'll unpack later, because the way you're probably saying these things to yourself is quietly working against you. Picture this. You open your eyes, phone already in your hand, and before your feet touch the floor, your nervous system has already absorbed 40 notifications worth of other people's emergencies. That's not a morning, that's an ambush. Drop the word reset in the comments if you're starting today. You already know the shape of it. The alarm goes off, and your first move isn't a thought. It's a reach for the phone, for the noise, for something outside yourself to tell you how to feel before you've decided for yourself. Somewhere in that first 90 seconds before you've even sat up, you've let 3 other people set the emotional temperature of your entire day. A text from your boss with a flat tone, a headline designed to spike your pulse, a photo of someone's vacation that quietly makes your own life feel smaller. None of this is dramatic. That's what makes it dangerous. It's not a crisis, it's a leak, and leaks are easy to ignore until the tank is empty. Here's a question worth being honest about. How much of your emotional state today has actually been chosen by you? And how much of it was handed to you by an algorithm that has no idea who you are and no stake in whether your day goes well? Most people have never once separated those two things. They assume their mood is just something that happens to them, whether they have no say in, rather than something largely decided in the first few minutes by whatever got their attention first. By 9 a.m., you're already reacting instead of choosing. Someone cuts you off in traffic and your jaw tightens for the next 20 minutes. A coworker sends a curt one-line email, and you spend your commute rehearsing a response you'll never send. You get to your desk and you're tired in a way that has nothing to do with sleep. This is the cost nobody puts a number on. Not just your mood, but your attention, your patience with the people who actually deserve it, your sense that you are the author of your own day rather than a character reacting to everyone else's script. You go to bed having produced a lot of motion and very little that was actually yours. And it compounds. That's the part that's easy to miss because no single morning feels like a disaster on its own. One reactive morning is just a bad morning, everyone has those. But a year of them stacked on top of each other quietly becomes a personality. You become the person who's a little defensive before anyone's even said anything. The one who reads a neutral text as a slight, who walks into a room already bracing. Your partner notices it before you do. Your kids learn to read your face before they say good morning. Friends start choosing their words a little more carefully around you, and you can't quite say when that started, only that it did. None of this happened because of one dramatic event. It happened because the first 5 minutes of thousands of days in a row were handed over to whatever showed up. First an app, a headline, a notification from someone who has no idea what your day even looks like, deciding your mood for you before you were even fully awake. Marcus Aurelius used to write to himself before the sun was even up, and the substance of it was blunt. Today you will meet people who are ungrateful, arrogant, dishonest, and difficult, because that is simply what the world contains, and none of it should surprise you or throw you off course. He wasn't being pessimistic, he was inoculating himself. He knew that the Emperor of Rome, of all people, could not control what the day would throw at him, only how prepared he was to meet it. Most of us do the opposite. We walk into the day expecting smoothness and then treat every bit of friction as a personal insult, as evidence that something has gone wrong. Nothing has gone wrong. This is just Tuesday. The question was never whether the day would test you. The question is whether you decided in advance who you were going to be inside that test. So here's the idea underneath everything you're about to learn. The first few minutes of your day are not neutral, and if you don't fill them on purpose, something else will fill them for you. That's the whole habit, reduced to one sentence you speak first, before the world gets a chance to. Not loudly, not as a performance, just 5 short, specific things said to yourself in your own head or out loud. Before you pick up the phone, before you check the time, before anyone else's voice enters the room. 60 seconds, maybe less once it's automatic. And every one of them anchored in something a couple of very old, very practical philosophers already worked out long before phones existed to complicate any of it. Let's be clear about what this is not, because there's an obvious objection sitting right there, and it deserves an honest answer. This is not toxic positivity. It's not standing in front of a mirror telling yourself you're a millionaire when your bank account says otherwise. And it's not pretending the hard thing on your calendar today is secretly easy. Positive self-talk that ignores reality doesn't build resilience. It builds a more elaborate way to lie to yourself. And your brain is not actually fooled by it, when you're performing confidence versus building it. What we're describing here is closer to a soldier's pre-mission brief than a pep talk. It's not everything will be wonderful. It's here is what is true, and here is how I'm going to move through it. That distinction matters more than almost anything else in this video, so hold on to it. And it cuts directly against something our whole culture rewards, which is reactivity dressed up as engagement. We treat the person who checks their phone first thing, who's already commenting, already reacting, already on top of things by 7 a.m. as disciplined, productive. Look at how quickly they responded, how plugged in they are. But being first to react isn't the same as being in control. And often it's the opposite. You can be extremely busy reacting and have zero authorship over your actual direction. The 5 sentences you're about to learn are not about doing more, faster. They're about deciding who's driving before you turn the key. Think of it less like a mantra and more like a checklist a pilot runs before the plane ever leaves the ground. Nobody watching a pre-flight checklist would call it toxic positivity. It's not everything will go perfectly up there. It's here's what could happen. Here's what I control. Here's how I respond if it doesn't go to plan. That's the tone we're aiming for with all 5 of these. Not hype, not hope. Preparation. Said in plain language, first thing in the morning before the day gets a vote. The first thing you tell yourself is this: today is not owed to me. Say it plainly, the way you'd state a fact, not a fear. It sounds almost cold at 7 in the morning, half asleep, coffee not even made yet. But sit with it for a second. Picture the version of you who assumes this day is guaranteed, who treats waking up as background noise instead of the single most improbable thing that happens to you daily. That version of you is careless with hours the way someone careless with money is careless with a paycheck, because on some level they think there's always more coming. You've probably felt the opposite of this at least once, the strange, sharp clarity that shows up after a health scare, a close call on the highway, a phone call about someone you love that turned out okay but for a few minutes didn't feel like it would. For a few days afterward, colors seem brighter, petty arguments seem beneath you, you call people you'd been meaning to call for months, and then, almost without exception, it fades, and you go back to treating tomorrow as a certainty instead of a gift you happen to be handed again. The first sentence is an attempt to manufacture a small, controlled version of that clarity on purpose every single morning, instead of waiting for a crisis to hand it to you for free. Marcus Aurelius kept coming back to this same thought in different forms. You could leave this life right now, he wrote to himself, and let that determine what you do and say and think from this moment forward, not as a threat, as a filter. Psychologists have a name for what happens when people are made briefly, gently aware of their own mortality. It's called mortality salience, part of what's known as terror management theory. And the finding again and again is that when this awareness is handled well rather than avoided, people don't spiral, they refocus, they stop sweating the noise and start protecting what they actually value. This isn't about morbidity, it's about proportion. If you knew for certain that this was one of your last mornings, would you spend the first hour of it doom scrolling a stranger's opinion about a headline you'll forget by lunch? Probably not. So don't. Notice what this does to small annoyances too. The person who cuts you off, the delayed train, the meeting that runs 50 minutes long measured against, I could not have had this day at all. Most of it shrinks down to almost nothing. Not because the annoyance isn't real, but because you've already set the scale correctly before it arrived. You're not comparing this moment to a perfect morning that doesn't exist. You're comparing it to no morning at all, and against that baseline, almost everything is a gift with some friction attached. The reframe here isn't life is short panic, it's life is finite, so pay attention. Starting today, before you touch your phone, name one thing out loud that you get to do today only because you're alive to do it. One sentence. That's the whole action. It costs you 10 seconds and it resets the entire frame of the next 16 hours. Here's a question worth sitting with before we go further. When was the last time you actually decided how you wanted to feel today, instead of just finding out? The second thing you tell yourself is this: I do not control what happens, only what I do next. This is the one that sounds simple and turns out to be the hardest to actually live inside, because your brain does not want to accept it. Picture the version of your morning where the coffee maker breaks, your kid can't find a shoe, and a work message arrives that ruins your mood before you've left the house, and by the time you're in the car, you're not late, you're defeated, like the day has already been decided against you. Notice the sequence there because it's worth slowing down on. None of those three events on their own is large enough to ruin a day. A broken coffee maker is a minor inconvenience. A missing shoe is a 2-minute delay. A blunt work message is, at worst, an annoying start. What actually ruins the morning is the fourth invisible event that happens right after the first three, the decision, made almost instantly and almost never consciously, that this means the whole day is going to be bad. That decision is the only one of the four that was ever actually yours. Epictetus, who spent part of his life enslaved before becoming one of the sharpest minds in Stoicism, built his entire philosophy around one dividing line. Some things are up to us and some things aren't, and almost all human misery comes from confusing the two. The broken coffee maker is not up to you. Your reaction to it is entirely up to you, every time, with no exceptions. In modern psychology, this maps closely onto what's called locus of control, whether you tend to see the causes of events as coming from inside you or outside you. And people with a stronger internal locus of control tend to handle stress with noticeably more resilience, not because less goes wrong for them, but because they've stopped outsourcing their emotional state to things that were never going to cooperate. The reframe is this: a bad morning is not a verdict on your day. It's one input, and you get to decide what you do with it. Here's the counterintuitive part. Though this isn't about staying calm through gritted teeth, it's about recognizing in real time which half of the situation is actually yours to work on and dropping the rest immediately instead of carrying it around all day like a rock in your pocket. Watch how this plays out with something as small as a delayed reply from a friend. The old pattern spirals fast. Did I say something wrong? Are they upset with me? Should I text again? And none of that spiral is based on anything you actually know. It's based entirely on a gap you filled in with worst-case fiction. The dichotomy of control cuts that spiral off at the root. Whether they reply and when and why was never yours. Your only job was to send a message that was honest and kind. Once you've done that, the ball is in a court you don't own anymore, and standing at the net staring at it doesn't move it any faster. So today, the moment something goes sideways and something will say this exact sentence in your head, not mine to control, only mine to respond to, then act. Don't perform calm, just move. You've made it a third of the way through this, which already puts you ahead of most people who click on a video like this and drift off after the hook. So if this is landing hit like now, it genuinely helps this reach the next person who needs to hear it. And it costs you 1 second. And remember that mistake I mentioned at the very start, the one that makes affirmations backfire. The reason most people who try this stuff quietly quit within a week? We're getting there. It's coming, and it's going to change how you think about everything you've just learned. The third thing you tell yourself is this: the obstacle is the material, not the interruption. Think about the meeting that gets rescheduled at the last minute, the plan that falls apart, the person who doesn't show up when they said they would, small stuff, the kind that makes you sigh and mutter, "of course," under your breath, like the universe is personally inconveniencing you. Or think bigger for a second, the project you spent 3 months on that gets scrapped in a single meeting, the promotion that goes to someone else, the plan for the weekend that gets cancelled because someone in the family gets sick. The size of the obstacle isn't really the point here. The pattern is identical whether it's a 5-minute delay or a 3-month setback. Something didn't go the way you designed it to go, and the question that determines your next hour or your next month is not why did this happen to me, but what does this particular obstacle make possible that the original plan didn't? Most people treat friction like this as a detour from the real day, something standing between them and how things were supposed to go. Marcus Aurelius flipped that entirely. He wrote that whatever gets in the way of the task actually becomes the task. That impediment to action advances action, and what blocks the path becomes the path, not despite the obstacle, through it. This lines up with something researchers call cognitive reappraisal, one of the best documented tools we have for managing stress. Where you don't suppress a difficult emotion or pretend it isn't there, you consciously reinterpret the situation that's causing it, and your actual physiological stress response measurably drops when you do. Same event, different story about what the event means, and your body responds to the story, not to the raw fact of what happened. The reframe. An interrupted day is not a failed day. It's simply a day with different material in it than you planned for. The action is small and immediate. The next time something derails your plan today, out loud or in your head, finish the sentence. This is annoying, and it is also. And force yourself to name one real use for it, even a small one. That single linguistic move done consistently retrains how your brain files disruption. Try it on something genuinely small first, before you attempt it on something big, the printer jamming, the Wi-Fi cutting out mid-call, the grocery store being out of the one thing you actually came for. These are low-stakes practice reps. This is annoying, and it is also 2 extra minutes to think. This is annoying, and it is also a reason to try the recipe I would have skipped. You're not solving world hunger with this sentence. You're training a reflex in tiny, boring, repeatable increments so that when a genuinely hard obstacle shows up later, a job falling through, a relationship ending, the reflex is already built instead of something you're trying to invent from scratch under pressure. The 4th thing you tell yourself is sharper, and it's the one people resist the most. No one is coming to rescue me from myself. Not your partner. Not a new job. Not a better morning routine bought off someone else's video. Picture the version of you at 11 p.m., scrolling for the 4th hour, telling yourself that tomorrow you'll be disciplined. Tomorrow you'll be the version of yourself you keep describing to other people, and picture how many tomorrows have already come and gone exactly like that. Maybe it's the business idea you've described in detail to 3 different friends over the last 2 years, complete with a name and a rough plan, and never once opened a spreadsheet for. Maybe it's the conversation you need to have with a parent, rehearsed 100 times in the shower, never once had out loud. This isn't a moral failing, it's a pattern. And patterns are things you can actually see once you stop being embarrassed by them. Seneca wrote to his friend Lucilius that most people don't lack the ability to change their lives. They lack the willingness to stop waiting for the right conditions to arrive first, the right mood, the right amount of free time, the right amount of motivation. He pointed out that we treat ourselves like we're one external circumstance away from becoming who we want to be, and meanwhile years pass. This connects to something psychologists call learned helplessness, first documented by Martin Seligman, the state where, after enough setbacks, people stop even trying to change things they actually could change because some part of them has concluded that effort doesn't matter. The danger is that this can become invisible. It doesn't feel like giving up. It feels like being realistic. Here's the reframe. And it's meant to feel like relief, not an accusation. You were never actually waiting for rescue. You were waiting for permission, and you're the only one who can give it. The action today is uncomfortable on purpose. Pick the one thing you've been telling other people you're about to start, and do the smallest possible version of it before noon. Not the whole plan. 5 minutes of it. Proof, not promises. And notice how different this feels from the usual advice to just have more willpower. Willpower as a strategy tends to fail exactly when you need it most at the end of a long day, under stress, when your reserves are already spent. This isn't a willpower move, it's a scale move. 5 minutes doesn't require willpower the way an hour does. It requires almost none. That's the entire point. You're not trying to outmuscle the pattern. You're trying to make the first step so small that the part of you that usually says, "not today," doesn't even bother showing up to argue. There's a specific version of this that shows up almost everywhere once you start looking for it. It's the person who's been about to start eating better for 2 years. The one who's about to finally use the gym membership they've paid for since spring. The one who's been meaning to send the apology text for so long that sending it now feels almost harder than the original mistake. In every case, the delay has quietly stopped being about logistics and started being about identity. Some part of the mind has concluded, I'm not really the kind of person who does this. And every day that passes without action adds another small piece of evidence to that story. The 4th sentence is designed to interrupt that story before it hardens any further. Quick gut check and be honest with yourself here. Which of these 5 have you already tried before and quietly abandoned by day 3? Notice that. It matters for what's coming. The 5th thing you tell yourself is the one that ties everything together. And it's the most demanding. I am not describing myself, I am building myself. This is a different move than everything before it. It's not about accepting your day or your circumstances or your past pattern. It's about deliberately acting like the person you intend to become before you feel like that person on the inside. Picture 2 versions of the same morning. In one, you wait to feel motivated, feel confident, feel ready, and act only once the feeling shows up, which for most people is rarely, if ever. In the other, you act first in a small, specific way and let the feeling catch up afterward. This is the sentence that separates people who talk about change from people who actually go through with it. And it's uncomfortable precisely because it removes your favorite excuse. You can no longer say, I'll start when I feel ready, because the entire premise of this sentence is that feeling ready was never a prerequisite in the first place. It's often a byproduct that shows up after the action, not before it. Waiting for it to arrive first is like waiting to feel warm before you put on a coat. Seneca again, this time on the difference between a person who has good intentions and a person who has actually built a character. He argued that virtue isn't a mood you wait for. It's a set of actions repeated until they become who you are. And that most people mistake the desire to be better for the work of becoming better. This lines up with something called self-perception theory, developed by the psychologist Daryl Bem, and it's one of the more counterintuitive findings in psychology. We don't only act based on how we feel about ourselves, we often figure out how we feel about ourselves by watching what we do. So a person who acts calm under pressure repeatedly doesn't just seem calmer to others, they start to genuinely become that person to themselves. The identity follows the behavior more often than the behavior follows the identity. This is the sharpest reframe of the 5. You are not lying if you act like the disciplined version of yourself before you feel disciplined. You are not lying if you act like the calm version of yourself before you feel calm. You are simply building the evidence your own mind will later use to decide who you are. Think about the calmest person you know, the one who never seems to lose their footing when everyone else does. It's tempting to assume they were simply born that way, wired with some extra layer of patience the rest of us missed out on. Almost never true. In most cases, what you're actually looking at is thousands of small moments stacked over years, where they chose the calmer response before it felt natural, until eventually it stopped requiring a choice at all. You're not watching a personality, you're watching a rehearsal that's been running so long it looks effortless from the outside. The action, today, pick one moment, just one where you act as the person you're trying to become instead of the person your mood wants you to be, and notice specifically that you did it on purpose. Now here's where those 5 sentences turn into something a little more dangerous than they first appeared. And here's that mistake I promised you back at the beginning. Most people who try affirmations say them and stop. They say, I do not control what happens, only what I do next. Feel a small flicker of resolve and then go straight to checking their phone, having done nothing except talk to themselves for 30 seconds. And here's the paradox. That actually makes people more anxious over time, not less, because their brain quietly notices the gap between what they said and what they did. And that gap has a name: cognitive dissonance, the discomfort of holding a belief about yourself that your actions don't back up. Say, I am disciplined enough times without acting on it, and some part of you starts keeping score against you. The affirmation becomes evidence of failure instead of evidence of growth. That's the trap nobody warns you about. This is the part that ties all 5 sentences together, and it's why the order matters. Notice that each one, done honestly, forces a small action within minutes, not someday, not when things calm down, but before lunch, on the exact day you said it. That's not a coincidence, and it's not an accident of how this script happened to be written. It's the actual mechanism. Say it without the action, and you get a hollow ritual, the verbal equivalent of a New Year's resolution, a burst of good feeling with nothing underneath it, gone by the second week. Say it with the action, even a small one, and you get something closer to a receipt. Proof filed away that the sentence was true the moment you said it, not just something you hoped might become true eventually. These 5 sentences were never meant to be said and left alone in the air. Each one comes attached to a small, immediate physical action, naming the day out loud, saying the control sentence mid-crisis, finishing the "this is annoying and also" line, doing the 5 minutes before noon, acting the identity on purpose because the words alone do almost nothing, and the words plus the action rewire how you see yourself fast. The sentence is the intention. The action is the proof. Skip the action and you haven't built anything. You've just narrated a person you're not yet being, and your own mind will eventually stop believing you. This is the whole hinge of the video. Not think positive, but declare, then immediately act, so the declaration becomes true instead of staying hopeful. Here's why that lands harder than it first sounds. Most self-help content quietly promises that the words alone are the work. Say it enough times and the belief arrives on its own. That promise is comfortable, which is exactly why it's so popular. And it's also why so many people who've watched hundreds of videos like this one still wake up feeling exactly the same as they did a year ago. The words were never going to do it alone. They were only ever the first half of the mechanism. You were told the feeling was waiting somewhere on the other side of enough repetition. What actually works is closer to construction. You lay down one small action at a time, and the identity gets built on top of it, brick by unglamorous brick, whether you feel like it that morning or not. So picture the version of your life 6 months from where you're standing now. Once this has become as automatic as brushing your teeth, you wake up. Before the phone, before the noise, you name what today is for one sentence, and it's yours before anyone else gets a vote.
You get cut off in traffic, and something in you doesn't spike the way it used to. You notice the old reflex arriving, and you let it pass through instead of taking the wheel. A plan falls apart at work, and instead of the old sinking feeling, there's this small, strange, almost business-like calm, okay, different material, what's usable here. You catch yourself starting the thing you used to only talk about starting 5 minutes at a time, and somewhere in there you stop being someone who has good intentions and start being someone who has a track record. People start noticing before you do, the way they always do with real change instead of performed change. A coworker mentions almost in passing that you seem less rattled lately. Your partner stops bracing when you walk in the door, tired. Nobody claps for this. There's no dramatic before and after moment, no single day where it clicks, just a slow accumulation of mornings where you spoke first instead of letting the day speak for you, until one day you notice you can't actually remember the last time you woke up already anxious about nothing in particular. You still have hard days. That's worth saying plainly, because the promise here was never a life with no bad news in it. Someone still cancels on you. A deal still falls through. Somebody you love still gets sick, still says something that stings, still lets you down in some ordinary human way. The difference isn't that these things stop happening. The difference is the space between the event and your reaction to it, which used to be almost nothing. A straight line from stimulus to spiral, and is now just wide enough for you to actually choose something on purpose before you speak, before you send the message, before you decide what kind of day this is going to be. The world hasn't gotten easier. Your coworkers are the same. Traffic is still traffic. Your inbox still fills up overnight. Nothing about the chaos outside of you has quieted down, but your relationship to it has completely changed shape. And that's the actual thing you were after this whole time, not a calmer world, a calmer, more deliberate you standing inside the same one. So here's the challenge. For the next 7 mornings, before you touch your phone, say all 5 sentences out loud if you can manage it, and pair each one with its action the same day, no skipping, even on the days it feels pointless, especially on those days. Write them somewhere if it helps, a note on your mirror, a card by the bed, anything that gets in front of you before the phone does. You'll want to skip it on day 3 or 4 when it feels routine and a little silly. That's exactly the day it's working. You are not describing who you are. You are building who you become, one ordinary, unglamorous morning at a time. If you're committing to the 7 days, comment the word built below right now before you close this tab. So future you has a record of the exact moment you decided to stop waiting. And if this video was useful, subscribe, because the next one goes even deeper into how Stoics actually handled the moments this one didn't have time for. Thanks for spending this time here. Out of all the mornings, you could have spent it somewhere else. Talk soon.